Greetings, everybody. Welcome to MoCo's Most Famous. I'm your host, Joe Yasharoff, the Director of Content at Montgomery Community Media in Rockville. This podcast showcases people that were born, grew up, and or spent significant time in Montgomery County. Today's guest is considered one of the greatest lacrosse players of all time, and he's from right here in Montgomery County. Paul Rabil, welcome to the show. How are you?
Joe, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. And it means a lot to be on a platform like this that uncovers stories about those who grew up in such a important place.
I appreciate you saying that. Well, we've been hoping to get you for a while, and you're busy playing and being an entrepreneur, and I'm glad that we got you. So,
and shout out to Meredith Geisler too for connecting us. Meredith and I go way back.
Geisler, one of the great PR people in the area and in the country. So, absolutely, shout out to Meredith. All right, Paul. So you recently announced your retirement as a professional lacrosse player in DC. I was there for the announcement at Audi Field. How does it feel now? We're going to go back to your career, but how does it feel now to be a retired player? Is that weird?
It is a little weird, but different, I think, and for a couple of reasons. I mean, the first is that I've been fortunate to co-build the PLL while I was still playing. So I've had the fortune of not only experiencing lacrosse at the professional level and then the business world, really adhering to the opportunities to grow the game, but also got to do so while playing, which was a rare task, and it was a challenging one. But I say all that because the last 4 years or so, my off season, so finishing off of a summer season, was no different than it is now, where you're just running hard on building 2022. In this case, from media to sponsorship to ticket strategies and venues, communication with players and teams. So I have my executive hat on right now. I think that, and this is part two, I think that I'll feel the side effects of retiring as a player once we turn the calendar year and I'm not getting ready for the season for the first time in 15 years. But I will be getting to help support the players that are, which is a big piece, I think, of what athletes miss when they retire.
Yeah. You see a lot of athletes who are kind of not ready for retirement. It sounds like you've been preparing since you began. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, when athletes cross over into their 30s, those that can play well into their 30s, I think have a strong objectivity and practicality around what they're embarking on. Our training changes, the way that we think about the game changes. We can be more effective playing into our 30s, despite dwindling ligaments and bones and fascia. But aside from that, I think every athlete fears the day that they have to hang up their cleats. And I think for me, I probably did it sooner than I would have had I not built the PLL. And I knew that going into it. And we were having, open conversations, honest conversations with my co-founders, my older brother, Mike, and our board when we were building the PLL. It was table stakes that I played when we built it. It was part of the recruiting process of players and such. And then I was dealing with a lot of injuries. Turns out that my last season here, my retiring season, was one of my better ones. And I think part of that was knowing going into it that it would be my last, and maybe the magic of being able to scrape the bottom of the barrel and come up with some tricks different than other players that I think are just ready for the next season or know that they have seasons on the backstop.
You mentioned PLL, and just for those who don't know, and it's the Premier Lacrosse League, which you co-founded with your brother Mike. You mentioned playing to an older age. I asked this of all athletes over the age of 30. When you see Tom Brady, and we're taping this the day after he had another ridiculous day, he's 44, and he's doing the things that he's doing. I mean, I know athletes are train better, eat better, all of that. Federer, Nadal, we've seen it, Serena. But are you still amazed by what you're seeing Tom Brady do at the age of 44 in football?
Yeah, no doubt. In awe of Tom. Know Tom pretty well. He's been helpful for me. He's a supporter of lacrosse, his sons play. And I think he's an example of a modern athlete that's really applying themselves across the board in every facet of life that impacts our ability to perform. It's not just our physicality or our athleticism, it's our ability to recover with good sleep, nutrition, hydration, our mentals. You know, sports psychology is a big piece of Tom's regular diet. So he's certainly setting the standard for athletes playing into their 30s and now into their 40s. I will say that Tom's unique, and what he's been able to accomplish is spectacular. And I also will say that he specializes in understanding what it is he has to do specifically on the field to be great. And it's different as a quarterback than it is a receiver, a lineman, a safety, a lacrosse midfielder, attackman, defender, a goalie, a soccer goalie, right? A soccer midfielder, a forward, and so on. Certain positions, I think, have the capacity to embrace greater longevity than others. What Tom's doing with his arm is the most impressive. It doesn't seem like the ball's lost a bite.
It is amazing. All right, so let's go back to enough about Tom Brady. Let's go back to Paul Rabil, the subject of this podcast. So you've talked about your brother being kind of the more business side, and especially when you were playing. So break down to us, you co-founded the league with him. Who does what, who did what, and now has that changed since you've retired?
Well, I think Mike and I work quite well together because of the characteristics that we bring both uniquely to the boardroom and the sides of the business that we have exposure to. So Mike kind of oversees ops, financing. We share strategy. I oversee media marketing and product, which is our lacrosse play on field. And there are different forms of product. You talk about the technology that we include from our broadcast to the products that we're working on through our owned and operated internally at the PLL. But he allows me to do what I do best, which is creatively think and strategize and communicate with players and brand partners and networks around the vision of what we're building in the PLL. And then Mike's making sure that the vision is accounted for in our pro forma and the way that we're building case studies and business models and making sure that we're performing so that the business remains healthy and continues to grow.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway because I worked in television for many years. How big was the NBC part of the deal with having the PLL be successful?
It was everything. We, aside from our financing, we view sports as a media company, and our ability to attach a massive media conglomerate to capture distribution out of the gates, I think is fundamental to our success. It's fundamental to any product or service's success. You can have a fantastic product or service available, and if no one sees it or it's not getting into the hands of the consumer, if you're a CPG business, then all that effort's worth nothing. So we reverse engineered the model, and for leagues that are traditionally built from the ground up with local owners and venues and then going to find a network partner, we went to the network partners first, and then we built our schedule with them so that we could capitalize on available inventory across broadcast and cable, and then we tacked on a streaming service.
And there was a league already in existence, the MLL, and you said, all right, we're taking you on. So you embraced that competition, didn't you?
Yeah, I think the competitiveness runs in my blood, had to as an athlete. But our first objective was to actually work with MLL. We were pretty transparent out of the gates, Mike and I, in trying to put together either a joint venture or figure out some form of M&A to help, because kind of the thesis was that pro lacrosse had tremendous upside, but under the current model wasn't servicing the players or the fans. And we broke that out into why not and how it could. Presented that to them and couldn't figure it out. So we did feel obviously passionate enough to go at the ground level and build a new co and compete. It wasn't the preferred path. That often doesn't go well. But we were able to manage to get out of the gate strongly. And then, a year and a half later, end up announcing a merger with MLL. So now we just operate under the Premier Lacrosse League, and definition of professional outdoor lacrosse is very clear, and that was important for the length of our growth.
For years, for decades, the perception of lacrosse was it's popular in Baltimore and Long Island, and that's it. Obviously, that's changed. What is the perception, or what should the perception be now of the game of lacrosse? What do you want it to be?
Well, it shouldn't be that it's most played or most frequently played in Baltimore and Long Island. What the perception of the game, or the acknowledgement of the game, should be that it's a Native American game. So it was actually created by the Haudenosaunee. So there's a people of the Longhouse, Iroquois Confederacy, centuries ago. And it was a form of spiritual engagement with the creator, a means to solve for conflict, and a way to celebrate. Today, the game that we see is the secular version of such, but its home and its creators are that of the Iroquois. So that's the story that and hope that is conveyed more regularly moving forward. Is something that we think about quite often with the league, and we feature a lot of our players that live on the Onondaga Nation, Seneca Nation, Oneida, Mohawk. A lot of those players play for the Iroquois Nationals team, and a lot of them are some of the best players in the world right now. So it's a unique time and place where we're telling the history of the game and educating people on the history of the game, and being able to pair that with what people are seeing on television when our games are live, and seeing Native Americans really dominate on the field is a great moment for us.
That's great. And I didn't know some of that. So thank you for the knowledge. That's why you're on.
There you go.
Jim Thorpe, I believe, was a lacrosse player. I know he probably played every sport under the sun, but
Jim he's Thorpe, the greatest Olympian of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you go to the history of lacrosse, and I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I've gone to lacrosse games over the decades. Jim Brown is considered by some the greatest, although it's hard to find someone who actually saw him play. You just hear that he's the greatest. Was it because he was the greatest, or was it because nobody wanted to get near him based on his football career, his maybe the best football player of all time? What can you tell us about Jim Brown?
Yeah, maybe the latter helps him become one of the greatest.
Yeah.
I think he was a dominable force, and that's what the records show, and that's what the sparse video will indicate, that Jim Brown was an exceptional lacrosse player. I've gotten lucky to know him and spend a lot of time with him and his wife Monique, and he cares a lot about lacrosse and cares a lot about its history. One of his best friends is Oren Lyons, who is another Onondaga all-world goaltender that is now a chief on the Six Nations and a spiritual guide and leader to many, and has helped us with the PLL. So Jim's not just a great lacrosse player. Last thing I'll say is he's famously known for saying that in a regular scheduled week, he'd play lacrosse 6 days and football on the 7th.
Wow. Amazing. The Gate brothers, also two of the greatest. Gary, considered one of the greatest of all time. I remember seeing them play at some Final Fours at the University of Maryland, and Gary had that move where he ran from behind the net, jumped, did something outrageous. I'm sure you know Gary Gate very well. So what are your thoughts on Gary as one of the greats of the game?
No doubt, he and his brother Paul are, and that move you're referencing is called the Air Gate. But Gary was well ahead of his time. He's like one of those generational athletes that you see in sports, that whether it was Michael Jordan, trend setting what athletes were doing in the NBA in the late 80s and 90s, or what we're seeing with an athlete like Zion Williamson, that are just kind of ahead of their time. Mm-hmm. Gary and Paul Gate were, next gen athletes playing in the 80s and 90s, and bringing a level of skill and athleticism to the game that it hadn't seen before. Gary's an advisor to the company. He comes to a lot of the games. He's still a majorly important figure in our sport, and cares about the game's growth. He's invested a lot of his time and resources into professional lacrosse, and we name our midfielder of the year after both Gary and Paul.
What does it mean to you to be mentioned with those all-time greats? That's got to be kind of heady stuff for you.
It is. It is very humbling, and it feels new every time it's brought up, whether it's in the context of this podcast or elsewhere. Because like I said when I retired, I always was a student of the game and admired each of those players that you mentioned. And I also never chased them. I wanted to hopefully play like them or have a piece of their style of play as a part of mine. And I feel really fortunate that I've been on some great teams with great coaches, because in the end, lacrosse is a team sport. And people may listen to that and hear it as a contrived answer. But, you know, I will say that I've been on plenty of losing teams, and I've been in championship games where we've lost. And there is a major difference between, you know, whether you're drafted to the New England Patriots or the Cleveland Browns, and what that can do to your career. Sure. Playing under Coach Belichick and a storied franchises that's won a lot. And so we see that a lot, and I benefited from it. My work ethic, I think, was unmatched, and my care for the game and the game's history, I think, was up there with some of the most people that are, I think, are inspired and care about the game. And that's what's led me to continue to contribute at the professional level.
Over the summer, you were inducted into the Washington, D.C. Sports Hall of Fame. I know, because I was there. I'm full disclosure, I'm part of the committee. What did that mean to you? I mean, now we're away from lacrosse. Now we're just sports, and now we're in the history of Washington, D.C. Yeah. So what was that like for you?
It was pretty cool. So if you were a part of that, thank you. You know, I was told I was the first professional lacrosse player inducted into the Hall of Fame. So that was exciting. And then being on a walk into Nationals Park with Gary Clark. So a Washington football wide receiver that I used to wear the jersey of and pretend to be in the backyard running routes with my older brother, Mike, now came full circle. It's like, man, I'm being inducted with my childhood idol. What just happened? And that was the feeling. And Gary's an incredible human being, and his kids play lacrosse. So we were both taking photos together for different reasons.
I saw you both spend a lot of time together, and I didn't know before that day that he was your childhood idol, and I found out that day. But he was an all-time great, and if you look at him, he's 5'9" maybe. And I know football players are less big after they play than when they play, but he wasn't that much bigger when he played, because I covered him, not like in the game, but covered him for the media. I couldn't cover him as a cornerback. It's amazing that not only was he as good as he was one of the toughest players I've ever seen. And he not only went over the middle, I don't know if he liked it, but he embraced it, because that was his role. And at 5'9", 1-0, it was amazing to me. And just looking at you, you're 6'3". I mean, you look like the football player, and he looked like the not football player, but yeah, he was one of the greats.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. It's a lesson in sports. I tell that to parents all the time that ask me about the size relativity of their son or daughter's ability to perform. And there are examples in every major sport where size does matter, but size, small or large, can be advantageous.
Sure.
I think one of the greatest athletes on the planet is Lionel Messi. And he uses his shorter stature to his balance advantage, to his agility, to his speed, to his skill. I think what you see with great athletes is the big ones want to play small, and the small ones want to play large. And if you're able to kind of capture both in different bodies, you can be pretty special. And that was like Gary. He had the speed to match his size, but the toughness to match some of the biggest receivers in the NFL.
And talk about competitiveness, and it's hard to gauge competitiveness. We watch athletes, and we say, hey, that's one of the most competitive athletes, Jordan and people like that. But he was one of the top in terms of competitiveness, fire, and that I've ever seen. So it was fun watching you two. And again, congratulations on being forever etched in that wall at Nats Park. All right, so I want to talk a little more about the retirement ceremony that you did the weekend that the PLL championship game was in DC. Did it at Audi Field. What was that a surreal moment for you? I mean, I guess you knew it was coming, but how, just emotionally, what was that like to kind of just be in front of these folks and say, this is it for me?
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard. We kept it to a tight-knit group for that reason. I think generally the way that my career has gone, and the way that it's been promoted, and the way that my team has promoted it, I think the expectation was that I was going to have a retirement season and And frankly, like I've always enjoyed as a fan of sports to see an athlete like Derek Jeter, or Kobe Bryant, or Dwayne Wade go out in such manner. But we decided that given, the complications, the challenges of building and playing in the league that you built, that I wanted to maybe fly under the radar for that moment. So making that announcement in front of an intimate group of family and friends and press, former coaches and teammates, was pretty special. To your point though, Joe, I spent, a few weeks really ruminating in what I would say. And there was a lot of emotion in having individual phone conversations with every person that was there too, because I personally invited them, which was a flushing experience for me in a way. And it gave me a lot of strength that day to share those words with the rest of the lacrosse world.
All right, so we got to go back. I mean, this is called MoCo's Most Famous, so we got to go back to MoCo. You're a Gaithersburg native, went to Watkins Mill, then DeMatha. So
That's
talk
right.
about growing up in Montgomery County, Gaithersburg, and what was that like, and what were you like back in the day when you were a kid?
Well, you might have better success asking my parents or my brother what I was like, but I know that I love sports. And my dad to this day says that, my dad was a paper salesman, 25 years in the business, and would drive up and down the Beltway every day to Waldorf, Maryland to get his job done. And then my mom was an art teacher, and they did everything they could to get Mike, my sister Rebecca, and I into sports that we wanted to play. And we played a lot of rec sports. We swam at the local pool, Whetstone. I played soccer, basketball, did track and field, played lacrosse. All of it was rec. Played I-270 ball, played for MVSA. And I think is important because the youth sports world has changed, and sometimes for better and worse, but it's very privatized now. The benefit of playing rec sports or public sports is that you really get intertwined and embedded in the community. You meet new people, and it's a lower touch model, which for me, I think about the moments in time where I improved the most was on my own in the backyard playing, sometimes with friends and family, but most of the time just by myself. And I think in a world today where there's a hope for an expedited path to becoming the best high school or college player, you're seeing kids play 3-4 games a weekend in a tournament, practicing every night of the week, playing multiple sports. And there was value in slowing down and doing all that on our own. And I appreciated that very much out of Montgomery County.
So you went to Watkins Mill, and then you transferred to DeMatha. What went into the decision to transfer?
Well, I had a really great experience my freshman year at Watkins Mill. We didn't have enough lacrosse players to field a JV team. So whether it was because I was just one of the few that had a background in lacrosse at that point, I was playing on the varsity team and I was starting. So for a freshman, that frankly was, I thought I was better and spent more time at hoops, to be wearing a letter jacket in a school with 2,500 students every Friday was pretty cool. And I finished that year scoring quite a bit of goals. We were in a coaching transition, and there was that moment where, okay, the program is underdeveloped at the time at Watkins Mill. And I felt like, and was being told that I had a path to college. So I began getting recruited by some of the local private schools, and one of them was Coach Long out of DeMatha. And he met with me and my family. It was a really hard choice, but I think the program was really established at the time, and put me on the right track. And so I made that hard decision to transfer from Watkins Mill over to DeMatha. Was able to keep all my friends and the value, I think, of like public school and in the area, but was able to really focus my time almost as a college athlete on acquiring more skill and getting ready for the next level.
And the next level was Johns Hopkins, and you played there, one of the obviously great programs in the history of lacrosse, and winning championships and being All-American. So just kind of the experience of playing at Hopkins, one of the hotbeds. What did that do for you personally and for your career?
Well, I think a lot of what we do in life is about the people that we're with. And I committed to Johns Hopkins because of the coach, Dave Petramala. Of course, they had a storied program. But when you're being recruited as a heralded athlete, at least you get everyone's best impression, right? Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, Princeton, Syracuse, Duke, Johns Hopkins. So it felt like the decision was really on the margin, and I was lucky to be in that place. But Dave Petramala, I think, was head and shoulders above the other coaches and making me feel comfortable, buy into his vision, and what he was capable of doing as a coach. And it was the right choice for me. We went to 3 championship games, won 2 of them, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot from Coach Petro and my teammates there at Hopkins. So it was a great place for me to be.
And then 14 years, I believe, as a pro with various teams. So many awards, Paul. We don't have time to list all the All-American honors and championships and honors. I know that I'm sure all mean something to you because they're part of your life. But my question is the meaning of those awards and those accomplishments versus now what you're doing. How do you compare the two in terms of your pride in both or either?
Well, that's a good question, and my answer is, I think, is going to be maybe the shortest of the podcast. I try not to compare. I try not to compare accolades with moments and moments with destinations, and I think that's a secret to playing in a sport or having some sense of fulfillment and longevity in sport is trying to be as present as possible. Because comparisons can live outside of what we accomplish on the field. It can be comparing ourselves to other athletes. And it drives a lot of stress when you're in the compare and contrast game. So I was always focused on the present moment and what I was able to accomplish.
Yeah. Jack Nicklaus was asked kind of comparing his playing career versus his post-playing career with, all the golf courses that he's designed, great golf courses all around the world. And the answer might come as a surprise to some that he said the golf courses because those are forever. And so I found that interesting versus, being the greatest or second greatest golfer of all time and winning, all the majors and all that. But he was more, I don't know if it's more pride is the right way to say it, but given the choice, he said the courses that will live forever kind of were more important to him at that point, when he was asked that question. So, okay, I want to ask you as we wrap up here about your website. So on the website, it says lacrosse player, storyteller, entrepreneur. So we've talked about a lacrosse player. We've talked about entrepreneur. Storyteller is something that usually a news reporter or somebody in that realm. So how and why did you choose to put storyteller as one of the descriptions on your website?
I care a lot about that, and it's something that I want to continue to improve in as a chief media officer down to a director, producer. I've been lucky to be talent in a lot of shoots for brands, for the pro game.
And you're good at it. As a guy who's worked in TV, I will tell you that you're very natural.
I appreciate that. Well, but what I'd say about storytelling is, and especially with the opportunity, and it's a good place to kind of end too, when you asked about the narration of lacrosse or the origin of lacrosse, it's not only it's a Haudenosaunee game, but good storytellers have the ability to educate and capture the attention in a very compelling way of not just, in our case, lacrosse players and lacrosse fans, but casual sports fans or human interest people. And what's great about sports is it sits at the center of so many different bubbles that have been created over the last decade and a half here in the US, largely due to the growth of digital and social media. Mm-hmm. So at a sporting event, you have people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, race, gender, religious affiliation, sexual orientation, and they're all there to support their favorite team or support their favorite players. And it's through that vessel of sport that you can tell very compelling stories that sometimes go beyond the game itself. That's what I care about. And that's why storytelling is so important to me.
That is a great way to end it, Paul. And that website, by the way, is paulrabil.com. And I want to thank you very much for taking time out with us today. And sorry about my dog barking in the background.
That's all good.
She's saying goodbye to you too. So thank you, Paul. Continued success with everything that you're doing to grow the game of lacrosse.
Thanks for having me, Joe, and hello to all the residents of Montgomery County. Appreciate you all.
All right, Paul, thank you. And that'll do it for this edition of MoCo's Most Famous. We'll see you next time, and have a great day, everybody.